in Manaus. So it's a very big city in the heart of the Amazon. They're famous in history because they discovered the rubber plants there in the late 1800s. And it's been a duty-free zone since 1967. So most of the small motorcycles that are used anywhere in the world are made in that city. It has a population of 2.2 million people, and there are no roads in or out of that city. It's all accessed by water and air only. And a city of 2.2 million. It's really amazing. And there are the rivers, the Rio Negro and the Rio Solomez rivers that really form the Amazon into what it really becomes. And so back to and this just gives you a little context on, as time goes on, societies and countries can think that they've really got the cat by the tail. Well, in the late 1800s, they discover rubber plants. And really the rubber industry grows. And so they thought that, they were going to be an affluent society. And so, here's an inlaid it was made out of quartz that was, made over 100 years ago. And it's one of the most ornate, and it's just over this whole central square in downtown Manaus. And then right next to it is an opera house that would be as fine as anywhere in the world. But then by the early 1900s, they transplanted rubber plants all over the world, and their monopoly on rubber was gone. And then they spent about 60 years in squalor until they turned into a duty-free zone. This is a picture of a hanging tenderloin, a beef tenderloin at the local market, the city market. And refrigeration is rare, so the beef they put mostly in refrigerated coolers there. All of the seafood was just laying out on tabletops, not even with any ice. And it was 95 degrees. And we asked them, why didn't you have ice on the seafood? And they said, well, the water's so bad, it'll contaminate all the seafood. And so if you wanted seafood, you're going to buy 90-degree shrimp and take it home. Or you could buy beef. But there was even some beef hanging in open air, and very little pork. And I'll get into that, but pork is raised there widely, but it's not a very popular meat in Brazil. So here's the meeting of the two rivers. The Rio Negro is really dark water, and the Amazon really light colored, and that goes on for a ways. And then, so just when you think that you leave, and particularly Iowa, we have a lot of DOT enforcement, and the rest of you probably don't have any enforcement officers. I'm guessing you do. We weren't on the water for 15 minutes, and this boat turns the siren on and comes behind our tour boat. They jump on, they check everybody's passport, and they put the pilot of the boat out of service because he didn't have his logbook done properly. And so we got to go back to port and get it and wait for a new pilot. But so they have a lot of rules down there too. Although down there it's not so much on the road, but it's going to be in the rivers. So there's the first bridge that I saw, and there are very few, over the Amazon. But the Amazon River is anywhere from 2 to 12 miles wide, depending where it's at and the rainy season. And it'll be anywhere from 100 to 450 feet deep, depending on the time of year. And when we were there, it was around 400 feet deep in the main channel. So it's amazing. It's simply amazing, the volume of water. And just everywhere you go, the river goes on, and you swore it was a lake, but it was not. So after we left Manaus, we went downstream on the Amazon to Santarem, which is toward the Atlantic. It's really the largest inland port that's developed that they ship grain to. And so it's about 400 miles east of where we had landed at Manaus, and there's a Cargill grain terminal there. 300,000 people, again, no roads to get there. You have to either boat or fly to get there. And we flew there, but it's so interesting. There are just dozens of fairly large rivers that would be the size of the Missouri River that are tributaries continually into the Amazon. And it breaks it up so that it's part of why they don't have roads, because it's virtually impossible to build them because of all the streams that they have there, because it is a rainforest. So this was the grain facility we had a tour of, and here's a structure right here that's kind of interesting. And all their grain handling structures down there, they have dryers that are wood fired. Okay, and so the next picture, there's the picture right adjacent to the grain dryer of trees that they pay locals to haul in to fire those grain dryers. Well, we were told that this is all new growth lumber, but if you look right here, I think you'll see on some of these, you'll see some burn marks where it wasn't all new growth. A lot of that was mainly a pile of old growth lumber, which isn't, the deforestation of the jungle isn't supposed to be happening over there anymore. I didn't see that happen here, but the evidence of that old growth would decry the fact that they're saying that they're not clearing the jungle anymore. Hopefully these aren't too dark, but we got a great view of really how the native population, there's a lot of small farms, they're trying to farm some areas in the jungle, and really, really simple, very simple accommodations that the folks live in there. They were fortunate if they had windows and doors. Native tribes still coexist out there, and they're basically they have reservations or territories that are their own, and so they try to eke out a subsistence. There's another one of the residences of the locals, and here's a picture. If we got up and had a little better vantage point, again, of the immensity of the Amazon there at Santarem. So after we left there, we headed south into the area where everything is really rocking and rolling, and where the cattle feedlot industry is really taking off in Mato Grosso. And I had said earlier that that region is 3 times larger than Texas. And the first town we went to was Sinop, and they only started planting soybeans there just a little over 20 years ago. And so it's not like they've been in this agricultural game for a long time. And to me, that's a little sobering, really, at how fast they've learned to do what they've done. And along those lines, there were 23 of us on this trip, and never once were any of us, and we were all agriculturalists, we were never asked by any of our hosts ever any questions about how we do anything. They had all the answers that they wanted, All right? So then we went to Ceriso, and Ceriso is where the newest ethanol plant is being built. It's about a 160 million gallon plant, and it's just down the road from Lucas do Rio Verde, and that's the town where things are really growing fast. And here's a map, and where we would have been in those 3 towns is about right there. So right in the heart. When you look at the center of South America, that's right where we were. And here's the surface map. You can see all the water and the few roads that are there. It's just transportation is next to impossible. But they're really aggressively expanding acres. And just to give you an idea, U.S. corn acres this year, or soybean acres, are 83.8 million acres, and they're already planting 89 million acres this year, and they're projecting to take that up 38% in the next 8 years. That's soybeans. Corn, they planted 45.5 million acres of corn this year, about half of what we planted, but they're also planning to grow that 38% in the next 8 years. So, which in itself creates some issues because of their transportation. So where's the grain going to go? Well, the grain's going to go to Lucas do Rio Verde in that area, which is a new city. It was only founded in 1982 and already has 70,000 people, and was not even there. It was jungle in 1982. And it's the center of this new ethanol, livestock feeding, and meat processing complex. And if you run into this big chicken that's in the middle of a roundabout, you know that you're in Lucas do Rio Verde. And right next to that, big chicken is a big meat processing complex, and it's a beef plant, a pork plant, and a chicken plant all under one roof. And phytosanitary wise, that's a disaster waiting to happen. But that's what they've got going there in Lucas. First off, we went to a big ethanol plant, FS Bioenergia. And the F stands for Paulo Franz. He's a Brazilian national that's partnered with Summit Farms from Iowa. And so a bunch of the capital in this project is from the Midwest. And here's Lucas Paz, young man that did a great job, gave us a great tour. I mean, we really got to see everything and had a complete explanation. This is one of the slides they gave us. And again, they're just talking about growth in their corn yields and acres that they think are coming at us. The big difference in their ethanol industry is they use wood to fire their plants. Here we'll use natural gas generally to fire our ethanol plants, and they're using eucalyptus to fire the ethanol plants. And there you can see the chips all lined up, but there are the eucalyptus trees ready to be harvested, and those trees there are a little less than 10 years old. And that's how fast you can grow when you don't have a winter season. And so they just bring an excavator in with the shear, clip them off. They let them sit for maybe a month, drag them to the chipper, and as fast as that excavator there could shove them into that chipper, they would load trucks and head to the ethanol plant. And they had enough excess energy in that 130 million gallon ethanol plant to provide all the electricity for the town of Lucas do Rio Verde of 70,000 people. So it's really interesting. And they used to produce ethanol using sugar cane, and the byproduct was not good livestock feed, and so they're pretty excited about being able to have some byproduct that they can use, because in Brazil they have no oil industry. They are completely dependent on bringing in outside oil or producing biofuels. So it's not unusual that the vehicles down there burn 100% biofuels. All right, now we get to the cattle business. So right outside of where that ethanol plant was, we drove probably 7-8 miles, and we got to feedlot country. So we'll give you some numbers here. There's 232 million cattle currently in Brazil. 232 million. There's 103 million in the United States. So that's how many cattle they have down there. All right? China and Hong Kong account for 44% of their exports, and they consume a lot of beef. Beef is easily their favorite meat, but their production, they've really ramped it up. And, we're always told that, you've got to import from these countries in order for them to buy your products, and they're never going to import beef from us. That'll never happen. What's scary is they're also ramping up pork production, big time. And pork is not a favored meat at all. They like bacon, but it's cured, fully cured, like salt pork. And so in the grocery stores, it's not even in the meat cooler. I found I had to look, and finally we said, shit, it's got to be here somewhere. It was next to the cookies, and it was unchilled, and in the morning in the hotels, it was salty as all get out, and it was salt pork. And one of the funnest stories, so, of course, when you're in Brazil, all the steakhouses are Brazilian steakhouses. So maybe some of you have been fortunate enough to eat at a Brazilian steakhouse. They bring out skewers of meat and a guy with a big, almost a machete, and they'll slice little pieces of meat off. And I was sitting next to Claudio, our main tour guide, and they brought a fresh skewer right between he and I, and he shook his head and said, yeah, and the employee of the steakhouse, maitre d', was serving us, and he started to slice, and Claudio saw that was pork. And as loud as he could say it, he goes, "No, that's not meat. I want meat." And everybody in the place could hear him say that, and it was pork. And most people in Brazil do not have a favorable look on pork because they had a lot of foodborne illness problems because of lack of refrigeration for years and years. And so all that pork, the point I'm going to make is all the pork they're raising down there is going to hit the export market. And again, and this is just a slide they provided us with, the red bars are the trend in their feedlot capacity. Okay, and so, and here's the feedlot that I was able to go to. A year prior to that, there was nothing there. And when we were there, there were 7,000 heads there. They don't say 7,000 head. Down there they say heads, at least where we were at. And these were 40 to 48-month-old bulls that they were feeding for export market to Britain. And if you look, you can see right there, that these are intact bulls. So it's maybe a good thing that the British like to eat their beef with a lot of gravies and different things, because I'm not sure how many of us would be wanting to have much fresh bull meat anyway. And let's see, they were all branded. They had a very identifiable brand. It was actually the same brand that was at the ethanol plant that was on the flag, FS. And so the same folks that ran the ethanol plant were running this feedlot. And then they all had a number brand and no ear tags. And you know, just, a high percentage or 100% Brahma or Zebu or whatever. But, you know, all modern technologies, fence line bunks, feed alleys, and there was a big feed truck right there, a big feed shed. They were feeding urea out of big bags, ionophores, distillers, ground corn, all cotton byproducts, which are great because they raise a lot of cotton right there. So they had cotton meal and hulls and everything, and it made, making a great ration. They intended for these cattle that we saw to be there 140 to 200 days. And then go to slaughter. And it's one of their big challenges down there is there's pressure. Well, I'll finish up here. They were just kind of finishing their handling facilities, which the guys that run those facilities told us that it's pretty important because nobody wanted to be out amongst those cattle because those, as you can imagine, I think a lot of those are pretty high geared. And they needed to have some bunk creepers. There's one that was out. So maybe look like our place. But I wanted to get to this, the Cerrado. So a lot of Mato Grosso is only maybe 20% timber, and there's quite a bit of this pasture land, okay? And this can all be farmed really well. If those cattle, and you could imagine how much of their grassland is being tied up to grow those bulls to 40 months of age before they go to the feedlot. So they're trying to accelerate all that so that they can have more land that they can farm. I kind of feel like Tracy Hunt. I don't have a lot of good news in this presentation other than facts that I think it's important that everybody knows. All right, now to the real crux of the issue down there, foot and mouth disease. And again, I'm not an expert on FMD. Dr. Max really probably is, and so if anybody has any questions, we can refer them to him. But these things, it's highly contagious. It's one of the most serious livestock diseases in existence. Affects cloven-hoofed animals. It's a viral disease. Vaccines can protect against the disease, but don't necessarily prevent it, okay? And so when we got there, we were told, of course, we met with their ag ministers, and they told us that they're FMD free. Well, then I had to ask the question for more details, so then they had to admit that that was through vaccination, which is a completely different thing than being FMD free. So, the primary means of eradication is destruction of the animals. It's not the vaccination. The vaccination is just kind of the way to get along, and especially if you're going to import product. So this is a scary one here. FMD, it's down kind of low there, is found in the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and South America. Bingo. 2 of these countries are who we're currently importing beef from. Kind of scary. And of course, on this trip, and I even mentioned it earlier, exactly 1 week before we left is when the USDA granted permission to Brazil to begin sending beef back to the United States again. So it was kind of ironic, the timing of that. So again, I mentioned it, Brazil is FMD free through vaccination. But there are already several southern states, and most of their meat processing is still down in the south, close to their port city. Their big ports of Sao Paulo is the main one. And so those states are already not vaccinating because they can throw some positive tests, which can make some export partners nervous, so they're just not vaccinating. But it doesn't mean that all's well. Supposedly, they told us the Indian areas are vaccinating, and then they're also actually taking Brazilian money and going into neighboring countries and doing the vaccination. Not just sending the vaccine there, they're sending crews there to vaccinate. And what's kind of scary with that is you look at all the bordering countries here with Brazil. And I know Dr. Thornsberry would agree with that. There's not like there's a chain link fence that's 10 foot high on all that border. Most of that border is unrecognizable. And there's a lot of cattle on the other side. Okay? And so I talked about the economic level that people live at down there is fairly low. Doors and windows on homes are a luxury item, right? So 5 cattle, the current value of 5 cattle would replace almost their annual income for one person, for one family. So the incentive is tremendous for cattle to move from some of these countries and get into Brazil, because that's where the processing is and where they can get cash for it. All right? So there's always that temptation. And I was told point blank by one of our guides that he was aware of bribes being paid at the border to fill out paperwork saying that the cattle were vaccinated in order to come in when they were not. So that's what's at stake with us importing from Brazil. All right, conclusions, therefore, on the whole trip. Again, tremendous agricultural growth is going to continue in Brazil. The rainforest destruction has stopped for the most part, but those Cerrado areas are still going to provide a lot of pressure. The transportation is going to come. They're building a lot of rail lines and roads. It's not like we're going to be able to send a lot of ag products down there. I know we have an agreement to ship them ethanol. Well, guess what? They're building their own ethanol, so they're already dragging their feet. Probably not going to follow through on finishing up the purchases of ethanol. And then the pork production is really kind of scary. I know burdensome pork supplies can be an anchor to cattle markets and beef markets here. And that's going to be kind of tough to get through that extra pork. And of course, with the terrain, and so really what I wanted to report on is what I saw of the terrain up in the Amazon region especially, and the lack of roads. We went days where we didn't see any authorities. There's no way that they're going to sequester foot and mouth disease, like they say. It's an impossibility. So that's the bottom line.